spent a semester on the team, so this place holds a special place in my heart. Kind of like you, I did Parley the only semester I was at SRJC, transferred to Chico, started doing LD, impromptu, extemp, and then kind of dabbled in Parley. And yeah, this semester is my second year.
Yeah. So third semester.
Yeah, third semester.
Third semester in LD. So I may bounce some ideas, have Kelsey interject some ideas because she's been working on arguments on this topic. So, and then I brought a panel with me because I wanted to share the burden. So,
my name, as you just remembered, my name is Cody. I've been doing debate for this is like my 4th year. I started in college. This is actually the first year in the last 4 years that I'm not competing. Rather, this year I'm helping Chico. I'm taking a gap year, and so I'm helping Chico's speech debate team while I'm waiting so I can continue to learn and grow. Because something that I've learned from this activity is that if you embrace it the right way, you will continue. You will always have new things to learn. So I like it.
My name is Mark. I'm the Assistant Director of Forensics at Chico State. I've been involved with the community for about 8 years, competed for 2 years down in Southern California on the state and national level. And I just love this activity, so it's something that I've remained involved with.
all right, so we're going to jump right in. The goal of this particular lab was an introduction to the topic. The resolution has been written on the board by Cody. I understand that most of you probably sat in the session where you went over the camp files. Is that correct? Where you got these arguments? Okay, so you've seen some arguments. I think it's important to take a step back though and talk about kind of coming at a topic before someone has actually given you arguments on that topic. How do you figure out what the resolution is asking you to do? Okay, so the way I do this is I kind of break it up into parts that I think are important and parts that I think are debatable. So there should always be terms in a resolution that people can interpret in different ways in order for there to be some, variety in the kinds of arguments that can be made. So if it was so straightforward that everybody looked at it and saw the same thing, and we had to debate that for a whole year, it would get super boring. So the goal of resolutions are usually to write them broad enough that there's a variety of arguments you could make. So I think if I assume anything, because I don't know all of you, I don't know the 3 of you that well, so if any of us assume anything that you don't know, like we assume that you know something that you don't know, please raise your hand and ask. We are all perfectly willing to answer questions. I would assume that most people would have an idea of what this is referring to. So what do you think?
I need to go way more in depth with the federal government.
Okay, so what do you mean by that?
I noticed that in the debate rounds, I don't understand how our government works.
Okay, no, that's good. I love that because a lot of people would just assume that they do understand how our government works and not ask pertinent questions about that. And one of the how do you get this coming up? Does it just roll?
No, there's
Nope.
not a button.
She knows. She went to school here.
Is anybody so I heard this on that the resolution is meant to be broad enough to have, and I can't figure it out the rest of it.
It should be broad enough to have equal ground for both affirmative and negative, and to allow room for a variety of cases and arguments, right? So what that means is the resolution shouldn't pigeonhole you into having only one affirmative and one case that you can run. It should be something that allows you to run a number of things.
Oh, I turned that off.
That varies in Parley, because sometimes in Parley they'll give you a specific
All
rule
right over here.
that they're going to pass, and then that becomes the point of debate. Right? But in Lincoln Douglas, since it's the same topic for the entirety of the year, usually it's going to be broader and bigger picture.
I think so. We'll get into a little bit too here in a second, but there are other keywords in this which, if you look at, broaden the resolution. Like critical infrastructure, the United States has designated, I want to say 16 different key functions, which they say are critical infrastructure, right? So right there are 16 different things that you can do and protect.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm the negative. and the affirmative is running a plan about specifically the power grid, then do I then need to base most of my points around that, or?
Well, first, can you move to the left just so we can see? In an ideal round, right, your arguments and the arguments that you're making are always going to be based on what the affirmative is saying, because that's how you get what we call clash.
Yeah.
Right, which means that your arguments are directly interacting with the arguments that are being made by your opponent. If you have a disadvantage, for example, that isn't dealing directly with what it is that the client is claiming to do, then they're just going to say that there's no link to their argument, meaning that your disadvantage can happen whether or not their plan is happening. So it's not a unique reason that you shouldn't pass the plan. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so as far as the federal government is concerned, the way we view it in debate is simplified because you're only speaking for like 7 minutes in a speech, so you can't get into all the technicalities of it. But what I think is important to realize about the federal government for this particular topic, there's 3 branches of the federal government that we typically will talk about in debate. There's the legislative branch, that's the branch that makes laws and provides funding, typically represented by the Congress. Okay, or the Senate and Congress, the House. Then there's the executive branch, which is anything that's under the realm of the president. And that includes the military. And that's important for this specific topic because Cyber Command is a military agent. They're within the Pentagon's purview. So they are an actual branch of the military.
They are an actual branch of the military?
They're not a branch, they're within a branch of the military. So they're a command structure within the military that I believe includes all of the branches.
The
The
combatant
Cyber
commanders?
Command, yeah, they include multi-branches. They're not like under just one.
The Cyber Command.
It's under NSA.
It's under NSA, and they work closely with all the other branches,
Right.
but early in 2018, Trump elevated them to the level of their own full command.
Okay, so they have their own full command. They work with multiple branches of the military, but they are within the branch that is the executive because they are overseen by the NSA, which is an executive agency, and the military, which he is the commander-in-chief. Does that make sense to everyone? And then the other branch is the judicial branch, and I think the way that the judicial branch could interact in this topic is that they decide, that's the Supreme Court, and they decide constitutionality of any legislative or executive actions. So executive power falls under the judicial branch, deciding whether that's an overreach of executive power or that's something that the executive could do. And so that might come into play depending on what you have Cyber Command do.
You know, in case you want to try and do something unconstitutional.
Right. So Cyber Command wanted to, if President Trump decided that Cyber Command could, I guess, access all of our internal records without having any kind of oversight, that would probably be something that the Supreme Court would be brought into because that violates our privacy as domestic citizens.
So increased actions, I think in the earlier, that's like means that they would, and that's where I'm confused because in the earlier session we had, they said that increased actions means they would increase what they're currently doing, right? So there's no change, and so will any of the plans that we see?
I like that you said that.
Will there any of the plans that we see that will change the actions, or will they all have to simply increase the actions?
So, let's put this in here. So, I think that this is key to figuring out what you think the resolution means. I think it can be interpreted in 2 different ways. One is exactly the way that you just explained. Right now, the Cyber Command is doing some stuff, and we might say that increasing any of that stuff would be an increase in actions. So you're only looking at what's currently being done, and then doing more of that stuff. But I also think that there's a debate to be had, or an argument to be made, and this is the beauty of debate, is I don't think there's one answer to your question, and we can debate about the answer to your question. And I think the other side of that would say, well, if Cyber Command's not taking an action now, and we have them do that action, is this not an increase in actions? And I think a lot of judges would say, well, yeah, of course it's an increase in actions. If they weren't doing something before, and they're now doing that thing, they have increased the number of actions that they're doing versus increasing the amount of actions that they were already doing.
For example, the NIST framework that you went over, Cyber Command isn't currently doing that.
Right, but I guess what I'm confused about is he told us that for the purposes of the debate, that's how we should interpret that. So, but you're saying that that's not necessarily.
Yeah, well, I think if you're on the negative and you're debating NIST, is it NIST?
NIST, I call it NIST.
Okay.
I don't want to say NIST.
So let's say you're debating that case that you've been given. You're on the negative though. You want to make arguments about why that's not a good interpretation. Why
okay.
we should not view things that way. So on the negative, yes, you want to say, increased actions means you have to do something more of something that's already being done. But when you're on the affirmative, you're going to say, actually,
right.
increased actions means that we should do more than what's being done, and that can't be something completely new. And that's a debate that takes place within the entirety of the debate. So the judge in that would be judging which of these interpretations is better for debate. Is it better to only look at things that are currently being done and increasing them? Or is it better to look at brand new things that they're not currently doing? And as a judge, I might say, well, for the purposes of variety, that one seems better. Because we get new ideas brought into the mix, right? So this one gives us brand new ideas that haven't been done that we can look at and see whether they're a good idea or not. So for the purposes of variety of argument, that's the better interpretation. But also as a debate judge, I'm like, your job is really hard on the negative, right? Because you don't know what the affirmative is going to say. And so to make your job easier, maybe this interpretation is better because you can only talk about things that are currently being done. So the negative doesn't have to figure out all the possibilities. They only have to figure out what Cybercom is already doing and then figure out whether we should do more of those things.
So those are those would be topicality.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Great question though. I think that's what I think this is all about in this particular time period, is how do we best interpret the resolution when we're on the AF and when we're on the neg, because they're going to be different. Because your goals on the AF and neg are different. The goals on the AF are to say this is a good idea. The goals on the neg are to say whatever the AF is doing is not a good idea. So topicality is a big discussion in that. Okay, and topicality is all about what does the resolution mean.
Then do we start at should?
I don't, so some people will debate the word should, certainly. I don't spend a lot of time on should because I think that's a relatively rare debate. But yes, there are arguments out there that you can make about what should means in a resolution. I think starting out, it is much easier to focus on these other things than to focus on should. And then as you get advanced, maybe in second semester, you can start looking at that meaning of should. Because should is kind of like, there's arguments that say it's a moral obligation, and then there's arguments that say that it means that you have to take some action. It means that you have to prove, you have some burden of proof. So there's a bunch of different ways. I think first semester, I focus on the other things in the resolution, and then as those things become more fixed in our minds as debaters, we can start wandering out into those words like should.
I would also say that a really nuanced debate about the word should for some of your judges is just going to go entirely over their head, and they're not going to get why it's so important, and you might lose them, right? Because they'll be thinking, why aren't we talking about the topic? Why are we talking just about the word should? Because our judging pool is mixed. So there'll be people like Sue and I and Cody that have a lot of debate experience and are used to those nuanced discussions, and then there'll be other judges that don't have a ton of experience and won't understand why we're not talking about the topic at large. That makes sense.
Alternatively, there are also judges who, while they can would just rather not, and they all are judging philosophy. which
That's
would
me.
be,
I would rather
you know,
not.
if a judge said, I don't want you to just run a bunch of T's and just throw them all away, then you probably just shouldn't run a bunch of T's. And those are just good things to follow. Because, you know, at the end of the day, it's not about whether you win, it's about convincing your judge to vote for you. And you don't want your judge to not like you. So really, yeah.
So in the resolution, the United States federal government, I mean, this is me, I'm reading it, and this is where I got what the consensus, what's going on in the room. It says the United States federal government should, right? But it's the resolution, so you would have to argue that the United States federal government do that. You can't use another actor, right?
Right. And in all honesty, this is even a little bit easier on this topic than it is on a lot of topics because it's a military agent. We really don't have state military control. So the state, you couldn't do it at the state level. We really don't have personal control over Cyber Command, so it's not like I could do it. So it really is a federal action that's required in order to use Cyber Command. It would have to be something done by the federal government because the military, they are only overseen by the federal government.
What does a military agent mean? Is that if they're a third party or?
No, so they are a military, I guess I could say command structure. So we have the commander-in-chief, the president. And then under him are all the military kind of, well, I guess I would put the Pentagon first. And then you've got like the admirals and I'm not gonna know the whole command structure, generals, etc. for each of the branches of the military. And then in addition to that, the Pentagon also has these, say what they are again, Cody?
Combatant commands?
Combatant commands.
There's like 10 of them.
Combat and command structures.
There's 10 of them, soon there'll be 11. The 11th will probably be like Space Force.
So for Cyber Command specifically, they are overseen by the head of the NSA.
The head of the NSA is also actually the head of Cybercom.
Yes, and he is also head of Cybercom.
Because like that's how
So he has-
closely they are linked.
Yeah, so he has both military and non-military because the NSA is kind of like this extra military agency.
It's an intelligence.
Yeah.
Yes, but he does both of those things. So he is both a military commander and an agency commander. So that's the reason why I used agency here, is because they're also functioning a little bit outside of the military structure.
I think his name is General Nakasone, Nakasone. If you recognize that name and his name, else.
So he's a general, but it could be like a general in the Army and an admiral in the Navy, but then he is a general who oversees the head of who oversees the NSA and Cybercom. Naka what?
No, Nakasone.
That's who's in charge of it right now.
And this is important to understand because the different military combatants have different jurisdictions
Mhm.
and there's different things that they can do. So, for example, if there's a plan about mobilizing troops in Brazil or something like that, right, that wouldn't fall underneath the jurisdiction of Cyber Command.
It would be Southcom.
Right. Therefore, it wouldn't be something that is topical.
However, if you wanted to do something more nuanced, like USFG should put in cybersecurity protections in Brazil, while there are some arguments against that, that would be one of the things that are Cybercom.
Basically, Cybercom was set up to do combat missions, which are not, I mean, I wouldn't consider them to be human combat missions. They are electronic combat missions. So they're designed to do offensive attacks on networks in foreign countries. So if we want to hack Russia's election system, Cybercom would do that. And that would be a combat mission for them because it's an offensive measure.
Did you also do?
They also do defensive, that's the command structure. So they do defensive protections of our own networks. So they try to set up programs that will keep Russia from infiltrating our voting system or our control of our nuclear power plants. They try to come up with defensive measures. But this term cyber says that most of what they do is electronic, not personnel. They don't have actual troops, per se. They don't have boots on the ground, I guess is what I would say. You look like you're formulating a question.
What's that?
You look like you're formulating a question?
No, I just was wondering, I mean, I didn't know that we had people that did that kind of thing.
Yeah, right? It's not something you know about in all honesty.
This topic is-
I did not know that this command structure existed. We debated a topic 3 years ago that used Southcom.
2 years ago.
And so I was familiar with this idea of command structures that are in different places. We have a command structure that's in the Middle East.
What about the telephone? Do they have anything to do with the telephone?
Yeah, I would say so.
So if that's part of their that's under their jurisdiction, the telephone.
What do you mean what do you mean?
I mean, I think
What do they jam telephone lines and that kind of thing? I mean, did
I
they
think
used to
so.
do that?
Yeah, they could do that. I think any communication structure that exists.
The hard thing with this actually is hypothetically, yes, we know Cyber Command can do offensive things, but because this is super classified and you start getting into the research, that's where the questions start getting super vague. They asked General Nakasone, hey, is Cyber Command capable of taking offensive operations? His only response was yes. Didn't have anything else on that, didn't have anything on that. And so everything is super classified.
But I would say yes, because the NSA is certainly capable of that.
Absolutely.
But then doesn't that, get into questions about, isn't the telephone the FCC or something?
Yeah, so the important part of what Cybercom is allowed to do is that it has to be on a foreign entity. So your telephone, Cybercom can't get
They can't
into
do
unless they
anything.
can prove that you're a foreign agent.
The NSA.
So the NSA can,
They have
which
to get
is
a
the
warrant
head
to
of.
do that.
Theoretically, sure. I mean, the Patriot Act made that a little bit more iffy. They can go in first and then get a warrant later with the Patriot Act. But that would be actions under the NSA, the National Security Agency, not Cybercom, because Cybercom is military. So it has to be against a foreign entity, a
Oh,
foreign
okay,
enemy.
so it's military.
Yes, yes.
It's not.
So the actions that you're focused on in the resolution should be those focused on foreign entities.
Not on domestic.
Right.
But the caveat to that is that it can also be defensive, right? So they can be taking actions domestically
To
that
protect.
that are meant to protect us from foreign entities.
Such as the NIST framework.
Right. So our military at the border is designed to protect our border, but they're certainly going to deal with citizens as well.
What that means is that with this topic, not only can you do both foreign and domestic plans, you can then also do offensive and defensive plans.
Yeah.
So as you start seeing, you get this big old circle full of potential plans.
Right. There's a lot
They
of
don't interact with the admirals and the generals at all?
They do.
They have their own admirals.
That's why. Think of it like a club. There's 10 other combatant commands. They can all sit in a room in cyber command and be like, hey, I need some boots on the ground because we're doing some cyber command stuff in Latin America. So Southcom, what's up?
And then as the structure that Sue drew out, right, all of them answer to the president.
And they get funding from the Pentagon.
From the Pentagon?
Yeah.
And
Which is
that's-
the president basically gives money to the Pentagon and then says, divvy this up. But they also get funding from Congress because Congress holds the purse strings on military funding. So Congress does have some play in the resolution, I think. They could fund programs that are lacking in funding now, and you could do that as an affirmative case, I think.
So just now, you said that they can only hack our phones, citizens' phones, if they can prove that we're a foreign agent. But if they could somehow make an argument that
Well,
they need to hack our phones to protect us from. Yeah, I know, but if I'm the negative and the positive ran a case that they want to hack our phones, then I can say that that's the NSA job, not the cyber command. So that's
Yeah.
okay.
that would be
Yeah.
non-topical. That's what my answer would be, is if you're doing this, even as a defensive measure, if you're doing it on domestic citizens, I think that that would be more along the lines of the NSA.
Even
That's
if
something-
it's to
And like-
protect us from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it would be like the military, like, if you said, well, the military should be able to go in and, I don't know, control entire cities because there's a nuclear power plant near there. And it's like, I'm a domestic citizen, the nuclear power plant's over there, I don't think my city needs to have a checkpoint in it. Like, you have a checkpoint going into that particular area, but you're not gonna set up a checkpoint for the entire city. But if, let's say, an emergency happens in that area, then they would be able to do that. Probably though, it wouldn't be the military who does that, it would be the National Guard, which is our domestic agency. Does that kind of make sense? So that's more along the lines of what the NSA does. And I think those are important negative arguments to have, is like an NSA counterplan to say, the NSA should do this because they're our domestic agency and they're more capable of doing things such as deciding what really needs to be looked at versus what doesn't need to be looked at, whereas Cybercom maybe doesn't have that intelligence.
And a part, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And a part of how you create that space there is by understanding the legal framework, right? The constitutionality of it, the way that the laws are set up, and the jurisdictions, and the mechanisms in place to maintain those jurisdictions. So when you say Cyber Command can't do this should be NSA, and they say, why can't Cyber Command do it? They have the capability. The argument becomes, it's not a matter of whether or not they're capable. It's a matter of it being outside of their jurisdiction, right?
I just thought of something else, like, what if the I'm negative and the affirmative theory is saying something like, they have a plan to increase funding for existing security measures? Can I then say that that's the Congress, not about funding? Or
You could. I think the better topicality argument there would be that they're not increasing actions, right? Increasing funding could be an increase of personnel, it could be an increase of facilities, it could be an increase in a lot of things that are meant to support the infrastructure of Cybercom without actually increasing the amount of things that they're doing. Does that make sense?
yeah.
What is Cyber Command and where is Cyber Command?
Florida.
Oh, it's in Florida.
It's in Daytona, Florida.
Yeah. Their offices are in Daytona, Florida.
Isn't NSA in Daytona, Florida? Isn't that?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, the same guy is in charge of both of
Yeah.
them, so they're in the same place. That guy says, domestic actions, you go over here and do this. Military, foreign actions, you go over here and do this. But it's the same guy saying all of this.
If you wanted to look at it this way, you can think of it as a circle of two halves, right? Which is why they set it up like this. You only have access to, as the app, you only have access to change half of that circle, but there is totally two parts to this. There's Cyber Command and NSA, which are super closely linked together.
What were you saying about the should thing and the judges? Like the judges are not.
Some judges just don't like particular arguments. I, as a judge, do not like time suck arguments. I don't like it when people just run a bunch of topicalities that bog down the debate. It would make me less prone to vote for you.
So an example of what Sue and I were saying is, if you come into the debate round and you say we should actually have a debate about a moral obligation because of the word should, or changing the word should to ought to, and having a philosophical argument on that premise, right? Most judges aren't going to be okay with that for one reason or another. Either they're not prepared for that, they're not equipped to listen to that kind of debate, or they think that that is too far outside of what the debate should be.
Okay, so yeah, no, I was just wondering, because it sounded like the judges were what you said earlier, it sounded like the judges were, some of them are not as experienced or something.
Oh, yeah.
That is true. Yeah.
Yeah, so you'll get some judges who are what we would consider lay judges, which means they're not judging debate rounds every weekend. Maybe they come to one tournament a year because it happens on their campus, and they teach argumentation and debate. Okay? So they have experience with argument, but not necessarily debate as a competitive event. If I'm just somebody off the street who walks in and looks at this resolution, I expect people to be talking about actions that
Some of the
cyber.
judges are just people that walk in.
Yeah, they're walking in from an argumentation and debate class, or from, maybe they did debate in high school, but it was more, like 10 years ago, and they don't really remember all of the technicalities of it. And so they're really looking at this as a layperson who is making a decision on a law that they would vote for or support versus some kind of moral obligation or technical issue or things like that.
Aren't there, like, there is a limit that, like, they have to have a bachelor's degree or something to be an open judge? I heard that somewhere.
Yeah, maybe it's being a judge.
But like, while there are less experienced, they are all qualified to some degree at
Yes.
least,
Yeah,
and know how to follow argumentation.
yeah. They just don't necessarily know all the
And
technical.
or the judges, did they just go to one tournament, or do they go to a lot of tournaments?
Most of the judges you will see repeatedly.
Oh.
So like you'll see me, you'll see Mark in the back of the room a lot. You'll see Hal from Santa Rosa in the back of the room. So you'll see a lot of people repetitively, and then each tournament there'll be like 2 or 3 people who that's the only tournament they go to because it happens in the city where they work. And they have a real job outside of academia, which means that they don't get to go watch, travel to tournaments outside of their area.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, at GGO, there'll be people at GGO who competed for San Francisco State and come back and judge as a help for the tournament, but they may not have seen a debate round in 10 years. And so they're really not thinking about all those should, would, technicalities and stuff like that. They're just looking at it and saying, should they take action or should they not take action? That's what I'm judging around on. Okay.
Should
All right.
they or should they not?
Yeah, that's kind of what I say is like, should they increase actions or should we not increase actions for these purposes? And that's what we didn't get to and we're running out of time already. But you can kind of see what we're doing. We're picking apart the resolution and coming up with arguments that you can make that kind of work with each part of the resolution. So the end of the resolution, I think it's important to recognize this too, means for the purposes of. So that's another question you can ask about those actions. Are those actions really designed to prevent complex catastrophe or protect critical infrastructure? Or are they designed to do something else, like look at, individuals' telephone conversations to see whether people are funding terrorist organizations? What's the purposes of it is also a question that I think affirmatives have to be able to answer. And in order to answer that question, you have to know what a complex catastrophe is
Right.
and what a critical infrastructure is. So I'm going to have Cody.
So
Cody's done a bunch more research than I have.
complex catastrophe is basically a set of catastrophes that either has multiple variables or is man-made, and there's a few other restrictions, but I'm a little bit loose on those terms. And either way, its goal is to give you a certain degree of catastrophes which you are meant to prevent. Things like blackouts. Those are man-made through other attacks on nations. Say if Russia were to attack our electrical grid, that would cause a blackout. That's a complex catastrophe.
And the reason it's a complex catastrophe instead of critical infrastructure, it is an attack on critical infrastructure, but if our electrical grid goes down, it will cause a complex reaction in our communities that is not just a blackout, but goes way beyond that, right?
Actually shut down electrical.
Yes.
Yes.
Computer.
Yes.
It's very vulnerable.
It's super, like, that's,
Yeah.
you're going to get into this, you'll start realizing, oh my god, I should probably change my
It's pretty
password once
scary.
every 3
The
months.
majority,
Don't you have to like flip a breaker?
Nope,
Nah.
not anymore.
the majority of the United States critical infrastructure is very vulnerable.
Because all of these systems, now they use the Internet of Things to operate. The problem is when they made this, no one thought that it was going to be attacked in 30, 40 years when they were creating all of these infrastructure sources. So now they're looking back at it, realizing, oh my god, this is practically defenseless, and they're trying to, and every country's doing
And so
this
one
too.
thing that Cyber Command is trying to do is set up systems of protection within those internet access points that keeps outsiders from being able to access our electrical grid.
But
Keeps people from being able to access our nuclear power plants.
quick question so
Yeah.
we can get back to what Cole was
Yeah.
talking about. This is a military thing. So would we be like authorizing troops to do something by
So stop thinking of war in terms of troops. Yes, you can topically attack another country if you wanted to with this resolution, but you would not be using troops because Cyber Command does not have troops. You would be operating in cyberspace, and there's literature on this. You can start learning about red space, which is like areas in the internet where it's controlled by like Russia, right? That's considered red space, and blue space, which is like allied area, right? All these are things, and you're operating in this space. And there's massive literature based about it.
To clarify really quick, they have troops, right? But think of troops in terms of personnel that are carrying out operations as opposed to infantry.
But, okay, so.
So no boots on the ground.
They're foreign, so we have people that work for Cyber Command in foreign countries.
Not in foreign countries, because we don't need to be in foreign countries.
No, the foreign aspect is to demonstrate that because it's U.S. military, the entities that they are able to take actions against, so offensively, must be foreign entities.
Because
Not
our
that-
military can only act against, they can't take domestic,
Right.
they can't act against domestic agents. Like the military can't be like, we don't like Black Lives Matter, so we're gonna go attack them, right? That's not legal underneath our constitution. So Cyber Command cannot attack domestic.
Okay.
Internet.
So domestic as in inside the country,
Right.
foreign as in outside the country.
Exactly. But that's the circle down here because the guy who's in charge of it also has access to the NSA, which can do things like during the civil rights movement, the FBI and the NSA were agents that infiltrated communications in like the civil rights movement groups in order to gather information and then share them with police.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, so that's domestic action that cannot be cybercom.
Okay. And then, so what I'm thinking of is like Syriana. You guys see Syriana?
Say that again?
Yeah,
The movie
the movie
with
Syriana.
Matt
Yeah,
Damon,
uh-huh.
where they're like, oh, President
Yes.
dropped the bomb, blow up the
Right.
people that are trying to sell oil.
Yep.
Cyber Command do that.
No.
No, because it actually has a material attack. So Cyber Command only deals
There you
in
go.
non-material technical attacks.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So if
Yes.
a bomb is being dropped, it's got to be a different agent of the Pentagon who does that.
Okay.
But, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, but they could potentially disrupt the network of a foreign country's nuclear
And they could like
and then cause an explosion.
attack other countries' energy grids.
Yeah.
All of these things.
I have a question. In our
He had a question first.
Oh,
We're
go
gonna
ahead.
get there real quick.
just a yes or no question. I'm an international student,
Uh-huh.
so would it be NSA or Cyber Command hacking my phone if they wanted to?
That's a really good question. So I think that in order for it to be cybercom, they would have to prove that you were a foreign military agent.
Okay.
Or a, what do they call, non-combatant, which means that you are an agent of a foreign actor, even though you're not part of their military, you're providing information that would be valuable to their military, like terrorists.
Yeah.
They would have to prove that in order for cybercom to take action. The NSA can do that right now under the Patriot Act.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
So in our packet of information, is there a history of the internet? Like a some
but that would be a-
detailed history of
No.
how did the internet start?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, that's like more history lessons on it. You can YouTube it and you can get a whole bunch of.
And in all honesty, I often tell my debaters, you know, in a class, I would never say do this, but for a debate, I think in particular, because you have such a short speaking time to explain things, I think Wikipedia is a great source of information. To get that background information, just make sure you're doing checks to make sure that it's accurate, which Wikipedia does a good job. If you go down to the bottom, you can kind of check their sources. But I think to get that information so that you can explain things better in a debate round, Wikipedia is great because it keeps it short and to the point. And then you can click on other stuff to explore it.
I think they're
Yeah, we're
next
out of
session,
time.
so-
No, we got like 10, 15 minutes because we're only going to, we're staying in this room. We don't even
Are you?
Yeah, we're not even going.
I have to go next one.
Yeah, you gotta go next time.
I'll say,
do you start?
the specific reason why like NSA and Cybercom are separated is because it is illegal for military operations to happen on domestic soil.
It's
So-
unconstitutional.
It's unconstitutional. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And so like when they set it up like so they could go around these parameters to do that. And that's why at the end of the day, NSA, Cyber Command can never operate on U.S. soil because that would straight up bring in like what we're just talking
Cyber
about
Command
oil.
can't. NSA
Cyber
does
Command
all the
can't
time.
operate because that would bring in the judicial court system about how unconstitutional that is.
Okay, so then you just lost me because if you can't operate on domestic soil, but it's in Florida. I don't understand.
No,
So, you
So
cannot
they can't do
conduct
anything
military operations.
within the country, but they would have to be
Yes.
outside the country.
and like it's official military operations. There's training exercises that happen on U.S. soil.
That's so confusing.
So, if you think of the place in Florida as being kind of a hub of computers, I don't know if it really looks like this. This is the way I envision it for it to make sense to me. It's like a huge warehouse of a bunch of people who are sitting at computers. Those computers have access to foreign entities. So somebody is sitting at a computer and their job is to look at Russia's nuclear control system for their weaponry.
Well, I'm thinking, like, that's what I'm thinking of weaponized. So Cyber Command would then shut down other places, critical infrastructure?
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly. If they were to do offensive actions. Now, there's a
So like
question.
Syria, no?
Yes, they could.
Yeah.
Does Syria even have as much
Probably
not.
infrastructure?
Yes, they're
Yes.
probably
I mean,
not very good anymore.
yeah, like,
You know, I mean,
Syria
it's
is-
been bombed the crap out of
Like,
it. So.
yeah, I think it was like 2016 where they were like, yeah, Syria's infrastructure is not coming back from this.
Can I have something I need something that's less obscure because I'm really going into like
So,
fiat, like I'm
Right.
I'm in the fiat world.
so for example, and the problem right now with this discussion is that they have not taken credit for any offensive action to this point. They don't publicize, like, here's offensive action that we took and we achieved this goal, right? But I would imagine that Cybercom probably had some hand in finding bin Laden.
So
Does that make sense?
Is this resolution saying we do not want to take offensive action?
No.
in the future?
This resolution is
fact,
saying maybe we do need to take
if you look
offensive action.
at the status quo as it stands, Congress has implemented specific laws that have been pressuring and pushing the president to use Cyber Command to take offensive actions.
Especially against Russia.
Yeah, like
Because-
everyone's just waiting, like we're just all waiting for it to happen. But
Whether
you know,
we know when it does is the question.
the only information I have found on offensive Cyber Command operations is when Snowden released all of his files. There was about 5 to 10 Cyber Command operations in there, and you really have to dig to attach them to the Cyber Command. But like that's if you want to find Cyber Command offensive operations, you need to look through those Snowden files.
So it's like when they got Snowden in wherever he was at and they're
He's not
knocking
gonna-
on his door, you're like, that's Cyber Command.
No.
No.
I'm saying that, you know when Snowden released all those files back in 2012? How long ago it was? He has millions of files. He's only released a small portion of them. And of the files he's released,
Our documents.
there are some documents of the actions that Cyber Command has taken, which are classified.
So they're just descriptions. So the people knocking on his door were people who were arresting him.
Oh,
Snowden?
so like FBI.
Snowden, Edward Snowden.
Edward Snowden?
Edward
You
Snowden.
didn't hear about this?
He was
Okay,
the guy
I
who-
need to hang out with you so you can bring my head back to earth. I'm already.
Edward Snowden was the
Debate
guy who
spirit.
released all of he was a contractor for the military and had access to all of the documentation that showed they were spying on people within the United States borders. And they were secret information, but he was a contractor and he stole those files and then released them on the internet. So
Oh,
that people had-
Snowden.
Yeah.
Oh,
Edward Snowden.
Yeah, I don't know who he is.
Yeah.
I mean, I sort of remember
Right.
something in the
Yeah,
newspaper about
it was almost a decade ago now, so it's getting out of date. But there were some, Cyber Command was in action then. But I would think that Cyber Command probably had a hand in finding bin Laden, like they were probably doing foreign interventions into communications that was taking place in Afghanistan and Iraq and different areas where bin Laden had been. And so they could trace where bin Laden was and was capable of saying to the people who actually went in, which was a different group, it wasn't Cyber Command, but Cyber Command provided the information that allowed that command structure to go in and capture bin Laden.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So they're
Yeah.
working with information.
It makes sense to me.
Versus-
I'm trying to, like, come back.
Yeah, they're just working with information.
Okay.
So it's almost like, envisioning someone who's in charge of your local transportation system, watching the computer and making sure that the buses are running on time versus a bus driver.
Okay.
The other command structures are the bus drivers. These people are just the people on the computer making sure that people are making connections where they're supposed to. So they just work with information. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah. a little
That's the
bit.
cyber part of it. Is cyber
The
means
whole
inside of a
second part
computer.
kinda confused me. How are you? Pretty good. I'm all right. Good to see you.
All right, if you see me at a tournament, or Cody or Mark, and you have questions and you can't find your coach, or you want to ask somebody, please feel free. We are more than open to give you what information we can to help you out.